All right, stroopwafels at the ready. Let's do it. We're diving headfirst into the whirlwind of Dutch politics this time around.
Ah, yes, it's debate season. The Algemene Politieke Beschouwingen. Always a good time to watch the feathers fly, you know?
This is the main event, right? Where all the party leaders step up, lay out their vision, and, let's be honest, try to take each other down a peck or two.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just reading from a script. It's high stakes. It's passionate. You can practically feel the energy crackling through the screen.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're not going to get bogged down in every single detail.
Right, we'd be here all day.
We've gone through the transcripts from that first day of debates, pulled out the juiciest bits, the real clashing viewpoints. We're ready to break them down for you.
And trust me, this year's speeches, they're like a highlight reel of everything bubbling under the surface in Dutch society. Economy, immigration, climate change, social values, it's all connected. And these debates, they echo much bigger conversations happening all across Europe and even globally, you know?
It's like holding up a mirror to the zeitgeist. Speaking of hot topics, let's kick things off with one that always gets people fired up. Immigration and integration.
Yeah, you can always count on this one to get the blood pumping.
Right. We're talking about a country with this long history of tolerance, of openness, but at the same time, they're grappling with how to actually integrate newcomers, how to manage everything. So where do the parties stand?
Well, you've got parties like the PVV, the Party for Freedom, and the FED, Forum for Democracy. They're taking a hard line, as you might expect. Stricter border controls, tougher requirements for integration, that sort of thing.
And of course, you've got Geert Wilders leading the charge for the PVV. Never one to shy away from a dramatic statement. He opens by talking about living under constant security for years because of threats stemming from his stance on Islam. Then he paints this picture of the Netherlands overrun by immigration, people no longer recognizing their own streets.
Yeah, it's a powerful image and one that clearly resonates with a certain segment of the population. But it's not the whole picture, is it?
No. Definitely not. You've got the VVD, the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy. And while they're also calling for more control over immigration, they're clear that they still welcome refugees. It's a more nuanced position, you know?
Yeah.
Like they're trying to walk this tightrope.
Right, exactly. It's about finding that balance, or at least appearing to. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got parties like GroenLinks PvdA, the Green Left Labor Coalition, DNK, which has its roots in migrant communities, and the Party for the Animals, the PVDD. They're pushing back against that whole crisis rhetoric around immigration.
They're advocating for a more humane approach, right?
Exactly. And this is where Frans Timmermans, leading that Green Left Labor Coalition, delivered this real zinger aimed right at Wilders.
Oh, what did he say?
He basically said that Wilders had conned voters by not delivering on things like pensions and minimum wage, classic political maneuvering.
Wow.
Oh, and he even went as far as to say Wilders was just a radicalized VVDer. You could practically hear the gasps.
He did not hold back. You know, that it's moments like this where you really see the heart of the debate. It's this fundamental question. What kind of country does the Netherlands want to be in the 21st century?
It's a big question, and one that's playing out on a global scale. How do you balance a need for control with humanitarian obligations, with this history of tolerance?
It's a puzzle with real-world consequences. The outcome of these debates, it's not just political theater. It'll have a tangible impact on immigrants, on Dutch society, on how the Netherlands is seen on the world stage.
Exactly. These are real lives we're talking about and real futures at stake.
Speaking of complex issues with real-world implications, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the economy, the ever-increasing cost of living. Because whether you're on the left, the right, or somewhere in between, everyone's feeling the pinch these days.
Oh, absolutely. This was a theme that ran through so many of the speeches, this underlying current of anxiety. Parties like the PVV and the SP, the Socialist Party, they really tapped into that, especially among the working class.
You're pointing the finger at the government.
Right. Oh, yeah. Accusing them of favoring the elite, of being out of touch with the struggles of everyday people.
Yeah, and Jimmy Dyke from the SP was particularly pointed in his criticism. He even went as far as to call for a revival of class struggle, arguing that this cabinet prefers to listen to the economic elite rather than ordinary citizens. It's like something out of a history book, right?
It might sound like it, but that sentiment, that frustration with economic inequality, it's not just a Dutch thing, is it? You see it fueling populist movements all over the world.
That's true. So what about the other side of the aisle? How are the right-leaning parties proposing to tackle this cost of living crisis?
Well, you've got the VVD and the BBB, the Farmer Citizen Movement, both leaning on the classics. Tax cuts and support for businesses, their argument. A strong economy lifts everyone up.
The classic trickle-down effect.
Exactly. And Caroline van der Plas, she's the head of the BBB, she was quick to point out that a lot of the points from her party's platform, especially those tax breaks for businesses, they've actually made it into the government's plans.
Interesting. So the question is, will it actually trickle down?
That is the million-euro question, isn't it? This is a debate as old as time. Government intervention versus free market solutions.
Right, a tale as old as time.
In the Dutch context, how these economic policies actually play out will have a domino effect on everything from social welfare programs to how competitive the Netherlands is on the global market. So there's a lot at stake here.
And speaking of high stakes, let's talk about another issue that's front and center, especially for a country with so much coastline: climate change.
It's not just about the dikes and windmills anymore, is it?
Right. With so much of the Netherlands below sea level, they're literally on the front lines of this. So how are the parties facing up to this challenge? Or maybe avoiding it?
Well, this is where you see some of the most dramatic differences in worldview, honestly. On one side, you have parties like GroenLinks PvdA D66 and the Party for the Animals. They're sounding the alarm. They're pushing for drastic change like yesterday. Emissions cuts, green energy, rethinking how the whole country interacts with the environment.
It's more than just save the planet idealism for them, right?
Yeah.
Given the situation, it feels very practical, even existential.
Exactly. But then you have parties like the BBB advocating for what they're calling a more realistic approach. A lot of their supporters are farmers, rural communities who might be hit harder faster by some of these big green policies.
So they have to walk that line.
Right, acknowledging the problem but urging caution, a more measured pace. And then you have the FED taking it a step further, almost flirting with outright climate skepticism.
Thierry Baudet, their leader, he doesn't mince words.
No, he does not. He called the whole climate change agenda an obsession, said that essential social programs were being sacrificed for this green energy transition that he claims is ineffective, unscientific. He even suggested reopening coal plants and the Groningen gas field.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
You could practically hear the jaws hitting the floor in the Tweed camera when he said that. It's a perfect example of just how polarized this issue is, not just in the Netherlands, but everywhere.
It really highlights that tension between dealing with long-term challenges and immediate economic concerns, doesn't it?
It does. And it's interesting, though, how the Christian Union Party, positions itself within this.
Right. They're coming at it from this angle of intergenerational responsibility, which is really interesting.
Exactly. Their leader, Mirjam Bikker, argued that we have a moral obligation to leave a livable planet for those who come after us. She even presented an alternative budget, prioritizing sustainability over short-term gains. It's a compelling argument, and it adds a whole other dimension to this debate.
It makes you think about the bigger picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do we owe the future?
Yeah.
What sacrifices are we willing to make today?
Huge questions, and ones that definitely resonate beyond just Dutch politics. Speaking of bigger pictures, we talked earlier about that sense of the social fabric of Dutch society unraveling.
Right, that feeling that some things are changing too fast and not necessarily for the better.
Exactly. This is where you see parties like the CDA, the Christian Democratic Appeal, and the SGP, the Reformed Political Party, really tapping into that feeling. They see declining social trust, a rise in individualism, an erosion of more traditional values.
That nostalgia for a time when things felt more stable, more familiar.
Exactly. Henri Bontembal from the CDA argued that there's been too much focus on individual achievement, personal prosperity, at the expense of the collective good.
So what's their solution?
Strengthen those traditional institutions, family. Faith, bring back a sense of civic duty. It's a vision that definitely resonates with a segment of the population, those who long for what they see as a more secure, more certain past.
But of course, not everyone feels that way. Parties like D66 and Volt, for example, they're all about pushing forward, embracing a more progressive, inclusive future.
Right. They want to see the Netherlands as this bold, innovative leader, investing in research and technology, creating a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone. It's a real contrast in visions.
It really is, like two different movies playing out at the same time, one looking back, one racing forward.
That's a great way to put it. Lawrence Dassen, the leader of Volt, actually talked about this, about a perceived lack of big dreams and imagination for a shared future. He wants the Netherlands to be at the forefront of change, not clinging to the past.
It's a fascinating tension, isn't it? Between the familiar and the unknown. And it's something we see playing out not just in Dutch politics, but all over the world. It's a tug of war, isn't it? Tradition on one side, progress on the other.
Yeah.
And as we've been talking about all this, it really strikes me that these debates, they're about something much bigger than just the Netherlands.
Oh, 100%. It's like we're watching these global anxieties, these global currents play out right there on the floor of the tweet camera. It's fascinating.
That whole anxiety around immigration that we talked about.
Which is everywhere.
Exactly. It's not just a Dutch thing.
France, Germany, the U.S., you name it. Everyone's trying to figure it out, and there's this economic uncertainty, cultural shifts, political opportunism that just throws fuel on the fire.
And it's not even just about who gets to call the Netherlands home, right? It's about how you live together once you're there. This whole integration piece.
Which is another one of those global puzzles. How do you balance a sense of national identity with embracing diversity, with making sure everyone feels like they belong? It's
easier said than done, for sure.
There's no instruction manual for this. What works in one place might be a disaster in another. Even within the Netherlands, you have this whole spectrum of opinions on how to approach it.
Which was on full display during these Algemene Politieke Beschouwingen. But I have to say, even with all the fiery rhetoric, the political maneuvering, there were some really memorable moments.
Oh, yeah.
Wilders, right off the bat, talking about living under constant security. You could just feel the mood shift in the room.
And then Timmermans, with that comeback, calling him a radicalized VVD'er.
Amazing. Political theater at its finest.
Oh, and Caroline van der Plas. She was so cool and collected, just taking off all those BBB policies that the government has adopted. Such a power move.
You don't see that every day.
No, you don't.
And, of course, you can't forget Esther Ouwehand from the Party for the Animals, always bringing it back to the bigger picture.
Always reminding everyone that it's not just about us, it's about the planet we share, the future.
The ethical compass of Dutch politics.
I like that. I might borrow that. But, you know, what struck me most was just the sheer range of perspectives on display. It's a good reminder of how lively and dynamic Dutch democracy really is.
It absolutely is. You've got your staunch conservatives, your passionate socialists, your free market evangelists, your dedicated environmentalists, and everything in between, all trying to shape the future of the Netherlands.
All trying to leave their mark.
Which leads us to our closing thought for this deep dive into Dutch politics. After hearing all of this, what do you think the future holds? What compromises will we see? What battles will be hard fought? How will the Netherlands navigate the challenges of the 21st century? These are just some of the questions we hope you'll keep wrestling with, because ultimately the future of the Netherlands, like any democracy, rests in the hands of its citizens. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.